Hello, I'm Casey Aiken, and this is 21 This Week. Coming up next, prominent Maryland Democrat questions electability of black male candidates. Maryland Senate passes major environmental bill without restrictions on fossil fuels. Is this a blow to the Green movement? And what is anti-racism, and should it be taught in Montgomery County Public Schools? Our panel of insiders will give you the story behind the story. We're joined by former County Council member Nancy Floreen and Secretary of the Maryland Republican Central Committee, Mark Uncapher. Stay tuned for these stories and more on the next 21 This Week. This past Sunday, liberal news website Axios created quite a kerfuffle in Maryland Democratic circles when it published an article entitled "Democrats Question Electability of Black Candidates," which prominently repeated comments by Maryland Party insider Barbara Goldberg-Goldman, who questions whether black male candidates may have difficulty being elected statewide in Maryland. Now, Nancy, to be fair to Ms. Goldman, always in these articles, the comments were taken and leaked, and they're out of context. It's also seemed from my reading of the article that she was really advocating in general on choosing a winning candidate, and in particular, trying to drum up support for Tom Perez. Is this really just an inside party issue, or is there something more to this?
Well, it's a reminder to all of us that you have to be careful what you say in any context, because I cannot believe that Barbara would ordinarily say such a thing. I mean, it's really over the top. I know she's a support of Tom, and I'm not sure of the circumstances in which this was said, but it's out of sync. It's not just the Democratic Party, it's out of sync with everything happening in this country. I don't think race is at all an issue in electability these days. Although I am reminded of Ike Leggett's telling me that he never put his picture on his campaign material. So, he could avoid that issue. So, he's something to think about.
Well, I had a very long political career, so maybe that was a word.
Yeah,
but truthfully, when you think of Maryland and Maryland Democratic politics, the prominence of African-American candidates, both sexes, male and female, it seems shocking that there would be an issue as to whether one group of candidates may have a more difficult time being elected than others. Mark, and again, this kind of dovetails into the issue where in the Republican Party, you have elected two male Republican Black African-American candidates for lieutenant governor recently.
Well, that's true, but if I could just expand a little, obviously that you're absolutely right about that. Nancy could have observed that we have yet to elect a woman governor, and for that matter, Nancy could have observed that we've yet to elect a woman county executive in Montgomery County, although we've had women who have been leaders in Anne Arundel, Prince George's, Baltimore City, and so forth and so on. These are barriers that will be broken in time. I certainly hope, actually, if I can have the last word on that, I hope that barrier for women is broken on statewide for governor this year.
Well, we do have a few more minutes in this segment, and I will point out that we had a wonderful candidate, a female candidate for county executive in the last election, and she happens to be on the panel today. So
exactly. I was trying to be a little oblique about that, but we probably should make that particular point.
Oh, you can be blatant. It's no harm there.
Well, that was a last minute run. But yes. I don't think that there is a real barrier to women winning. It's just, a lot of guys you got to fight with to get on the ballot, and it's expensive, and it's you got to have the heart for that.
Well, I think
I took the easy way.
I think Mark's other issue, which he didn't want to portray, is that there is a female Republican running for governor this time, and it's going to be an interesting race with her two male counterparts in that primary, and we're certainly going to take a look at that. when it's right. But my feeling on this particular thing is that I don't know Nancy Goldman. I understand she's a very good person, and I just think this was an inside baseball kind of thing. And she was talking about her own particular desire to elect Tom Perez and giving reasons why he would be a stronger candidate than some of the others. So I think
but I mean, I don't think that she would ever advance that. I mean, that is not a campaign ploy that you're going to make public. That would really hurt Tom to do that within the voter constituency. Generally speaking, I think it would be a very unwise approach. So it's just a wacky thing to have come out of anything that Barbara would say. Barbara's a dedicated Democrat and has worked in the field for years and years and years. So, and supported all kinds of people. So, I get, every so often we all make mistakes.
Well, we'll let you have the let you have the last word, and I will correct myself. I identified her as Nancy Goldman instead of Barbara Goldman.
Yeah.
I apologize for that. Let's go on to our second topic, which is all about the environment. The Maryland Senate voted to pass a sweeping climate change bill that accelerates the state's greenhouse gas reduction goals of making the state carbon neutral by 2045. However, the Senate chamber did not include a proposal that would have outlawed fossil fuels-based heating systems in new buildings. Now, Mark, why was there a carve-out that excluded new buildings? But it also, the chairman of the committee also admitted Maryland can't solve this problem all by themselves. So is there going to be a conflict between the Senate bill and the House bill, and will there be a bill?
Well, apparently, and I don't pretend to be able to predict how that will come out. It's worth noting that we're undergoing a very significant energy transition. Quite apart from the law, that's what's going forward. And part of that transition has been the use of natural gas. And as a result of using more natural gas, we've been able to cut back on, CO2 emitters such as coal, and that's helped us with that transition. So the challenge in this is really how long does natural gas work? It certainly has a lot of benefits, and I think that's probably in the details where really the government shouldn't be regulating to that detail, but probably should focus on other metrics such as perhaps some kind of fee in order to encourage the transition to take place, but allow for economics to dictate how quickly it takes place.
Well, Nancy, if the chairman of the Senate committee doesn't think the state of Maryland can solve the problem of the environment, we all know Montgomery County thinks that it can and likes to march down the road with its own drummer. The Montgomery County Climate Action Plan seeks to cut greenhouse gas emissions completely by 2035, 10 years before the proposed bill that the Senate passed. So, it does, on a macro level, and just as, for good governance, is it really good governance to have a county and a state not marching to the same standards? I mean, shouldn't, the state advance the standards and the counties, whose influence is relatively small in this in itself, follow the state, not vice versa?
Well, let's agree the environmental issues are important and really quite significant as we go forward, and very few people really want to accept that. But it is a fact. So Montgomery County likes to push the limit. That's what we've always done here. Of course, the devil is in the details. Maryland is about, I looked it up, is about 40% dependent on natural gas to fuel its electricity. So what the District of Columbia did recently was to establish a goal of moving to 100% renewable energy in the next decade or so. And I think that's a more relevant goal to look at, to create incentives for the industry to change its ways. But the reality is really quite different. Asking apartment builders to change the way they do business, to the way they retrofit, and asking existing building owners to retrofit their buildings is incredibly expensive. And is it a rational solution? I don't know. But if you don't push, you don't get anywhere. And I think that's been Montgomery County's view.
Well, I understand that, but it's to the point that Mark was making earlier, given the fact that we are involved in a worldwide crisis, that at its center point, at its focal point, is the question of whether energy and energy policy is a national security issue. Doesn't it seem that we have to incorporate those ideas as well into our environmental policy?
I think that this really underscores the fact that there are these very difficult trade-offs that we're experiencing as a result of the Russian invasion to Ukraine. It really makes more sense, rather than engaging in these sort of virtue signaling mandate, to allow for an economic process to move forward to enable this transition. I think DC going to all renewables is really counterproductive because it ends up not allowing for the surge capacity that you will need for a number of, for a period of time to, for example, allow for cars to get recharged if they're electric, or to provide for cooling during peak times. Again, the mandate approach is counterproductive to what is a general objective that we are going through, that successfully is taking place in this country, and actually in this, the broader industrialized world. And it adds costs to it that will in fact create pushback. I think people are looking at what they're paying at the pump right now and wondering whether or not the energy mandates maybe don't quite make such sense.
Well, the other thing that I don't think Marylanders necessarily realize is that we rely for about 40% of our electricity. It comes from nuclear sources. And that is actually clean energy. And I'm not sure too many people want to support additional nuclear plants. But the bigger picture is a really tough one for people to swallow. We're so used to cheap gas. It's incredible. I mean, if we lived in Europe, I don't know what their numbers are. They're probably paying $15 a gallon, what translates into that much in Europe these days because of the increase in costs. And they're used to it, and they've changed their ways as a result of it. I don't know how else we do that. How else do we get people out of their gasoline-fueled vehicles or depending upon gasoline to make things happen? The change has got to be financial and economic, as Mark says, and I think that's the way it happens.
Well, as I've said often on this show, my first real job was with the Department of Energy just after it was created in 1978, and at that time it was all nuke all the way. Mm-hmm. And so I'm all in favor of additional nuclear energy. I think through technology we can solve the waste program, the problems, and it's proven to be a safe industry here in the United States. It's been more than almost 45 years since 3 Mile Island, and I think the fear factor should have subsided at this point because it is clean energy. So when we come back from this short break, what exactly is anti-racism? And should it be taught in Montgomery County Public Schools? Stay tuned. Welcome back. On March 14th, the conservative news website, Washington Free Beacon, reported on the year-long efforts by the Montgomery County Public School System to conduct an anti-racist audit of parents in order to examine institutional racism in MCPS schools. As at the time, the interim superintendent of schools, now the full-time superintendent of schools, Monica McKnight, wrote in February, "The truth is, talking about race is hard. School districts around the country have been struggling to engage in these conversations, and as community members pick sides and point fingers, yet we cannot avoid talking about race in MCPS because our data, recent experiences, and the disparity of how COVID-19 affected the community won't allow us." Now, Nancy, the Washington Free Beacon article quotes former school administrator Dee Rubin, who contends that that the MCPS literacy rates are falling, and that the county has wrong priorities here, that it should think about academics rather than social policy. Is that a fair statement?
Look, they think about a lot of things. They have a lot of money, $2.5 billion, $3 billion budget. They've got room in there to examine a lot of priorities and a lot of items. And I'm not surprised that they've done this. The great thing about having kids in the Montgomery County Public School system is that they meet children who are not like themselves, by and large. Now, in some of the wider parts of Montgomery County, that may be less of a reality, but certainly for my kids, they got to know kids of every race and every background. And that's what taught them, I think, to view the world as an inclusive community. So I'm curious about this effort that MCPS is going into at this moment. I'm not sure how you do that. When I was a kid, kids made fun of everybody, whatever color they were, whether they were Jewish, whether they were Black, whether they were fat, whether they, were great on the sports field. People made fun of each other. I think we encourage the abandonment of that approach to how we treat each other and how children do that. And I think that's endemic already in the school system and in our community. So I'm not sure what these next steps would involve for MCPS. We'll see.
Well, so Mark, this anti-racism definition, it's defined as a policy or practice of opposing racism and promoting racial equality. Now, if that's what's being taught, what can be wrong with that?
Well, I think one of the challenges, there's nothing wrong with it in the sense of what the broader intent is. I think that it's somewhat misleading as to where the sources of where the problem is. If we're looking at outcomes, mandating outcomes, a lot of things that are in the inputs aren't really the cause of racism. Let's take a look at COVID. We're going to see a fair amount of educational disparities as a result of that, because wealthier parents and better educated parents had the wherewithal to continue their kids' education and did so. And parents that were not as fortunate, their kids did worse. And we're going to see those show up in the test scores, and that's going to prove a disparity. There's going to be some finger pointing at closing the schools and masking in the various policies. But there was obviously, schools were closed for at least a period of time, pretty much across the country. So I kind of hesitate. Some of the disparities probably are not best attributed to racism, but are part of sort of broader social phenomena that have this collateral impact of creating educational disparities.
Well, but again, I think, the superintendent's comment is absolutely correct. It's very hard to talk about race. And it's, because you don't want to say the incorrect thing. But we saw a little bit of an argument in our last elections for the school board about how boundary lines and resources were being divided up amongst the schools. And we saw last summer in Loudoun County, a uprising of parents over the teaching of critical race theory in their schools that worked its way into the governor's election and had a major impact. So these are issues that we can't ignore. I think we have to be realistic that they exist there and are out there.
And could I point, this year we have a very important Supreme Court case that's coming up that is a challenge to the admissions policy of the elite Ivy League schools. Not all of them, I think most of them are involved in the case. And the observation is that the processes that are in place to create equity are operating to discriminate against Asians. And they're, you'll compare test scores and what have you. We're experiencing what is a very ugly phenomena that reminds us of the period of time when some of those same schools discriminated against Jews because they thought there would be too many. So now we're doing the same thing with Asians. We'll see how that case comes out. But I kind of hesitate. I worry that in sort of looking at a zero-sum society in which every result is equalized, that we end up disenfranchising people who who have show merit, who work harder, who do more, who have more in the way of accomplishments.
Nancy, your thoughts?
Well, getting back to the subject at hand, I do think, the disparity issue that we've seen for many years in Montgomery County Public Schools is largely due to economic inequality. And you can sort of map that in terms of the communities that have fewer resources and the kinds of folks who can afford to live there. So housing opportunities and choices really drive this issue historically far more than the color of your skin. Because, Montgomery County, recently, I know that certainly when I left the council was not a majority any group within the school system. And I'm not sure what the numbers are today, but I'm sure it's continued that way. So the school system is already made up of a lot of people of a lot of different backgrounds and races. And the real issue in terms of performance, I think, comes, as much from family support and family resources as to who's teaching you to multiply. These are a combination of issues that I know the council has tried to address over a number of years, and I'm sure they will continue to do that.
Well, thank you, and thank you both. It's a tough subject to talk about.
Yeah.
I think this is, it's a flashpoint politically and socially, and we should be aware of it and be prepared to discuss it. Stay tuned for parting shots when we come back from this short break. And welcome back. Now with parting shots, Mark Uncapher.
Casey, one of the developments that people in Annapolis and across the state will be watching very closely is the decision of the Maryland Court of Appeals on redistricting. They have already ordered the primary to be moved and changed some of the other deadlines. Perhaps the other shoe that will drop is a change in the lines to go back to the recommendations of the bipartisan commission that in many ways were much fairer and much more reasonable.
Thank you, Mark. Well, that's one thing we'll be watching. I almost had that as a show topic for this week. So good parting shot. Nancy, your parting shot.
My parting shot is that, hey, winter is over. I encourage everybody to get out there, enjoy what Montgomery County has to offer. We have some fabulous hiking trails, biking areas. We have the C&O Canal. We have the Seneca Greenway. We have trails all over Montgomery County. Turn off the TV after you watch the show and get out there. It's a beautiful community, and your taxes are supporting one of the greatest recreational resources in the whole region. So I encourage everybody to get out there now.
That's a wonderful thought, especially now. As many of you can see, I'm wearing a blue and yellow tie in support of the Ukrainian resistance movement. And it's hard to not be overwhelmed by the conflagration that's occurring overseas. But it's something that we should watch carefully because it may have a direct impact on us. But we still have to live our own lives and continue living our own lives the best that we can. I want to thank the guests for being here today. And I want to thank the audience, of course, for each and every week tuning in to Montgomery County's hardest hitting political talk show. For 21 this week, I'm Casey Aiken.
Casey, I thought your tie was for Mater Day.